The courtroom hummed with a tension so thick it felt almost physical. Every seat was filled, cameras perched on tripods like mechanical vultures, reporters scribbling furiously in notepads, and spectators leaning forward as though their own hearts could sense the gravity of the moment. Jasmine Crockett entered with measured poise, each step deliberate, echoing faintly across the polished marble floor. She wore a calm that belied the storm she carried, a sense of inevitability that silenced the whispers as she passed. Eyes turned, some wide in anticipation, others narrow with suspicion, but all fixed on the woman who had promised to reveal a truth long buried behind walls of power. Jasmine stopped at the center of the courtroom and lifted her gaze. The judge nodded once, curtly, acknowledging the beginning of proceedings. The cameras clicked and whirred, but Jasmine's presence drew all attention, commanding the space without a word. She began her opening statement, voice firm yet resonant, each syllable deliberately paced to land like a hammer. "Today," she said, "we are not here to debate rhetoric, nor to entertain partisan narratives. Today, we confront a truth that has been hidden from the public, a series of decisions, statements, and actions carefully concealed by one of the most powerful figures in modern American history. Transparency is not optional. Accountability is inevitable." A murmur passed through the courtroom, but Jasmine's gaze never faltered. The first hint of the revelation was subtle but deliberate. She referenced publicly available documents, financial filings, and prior statements, building the narrative slowly, allowing the audience both in the room and watching through media coverage to catch their first glimpse of the contradictions. "Facts, unvarnished and undeniable, will speak louder than any spin or deflection," she said, "and they will speak today." The words hung in the air, heavy, taut with tension. Even Trump's legal team leaned forward, exchanging measured glances, aware that the narrative they had rehearsed for months was about to be challenged in ways that would ripple far beyond this. Courtroom. As witnesses were called to the stand, Jasmine's methodical approach became evident. Each question was designed to expose inconsistencies, each gesture a subtle command of attention. When a former aide hesitated under questioning, Jasmine's calm yet piercing gaze drew the truth into the open. "You understand the gravity of your testimony?" she asked quietly, but the question carried weight that resonated across the room. The aide swallowed hard, nodding, and the courtroom seemed to shift slightly, as if the very air recognized that history was unfolding. By the end of the chapter, the first layer of tension had been set. Jasmine had signaled that this was not merely a legal proceeding, but a moral reckoning. Cameras captured the reactions, the tightening of jaws, the subtle flinch of counsel, the wide-eyed astonishment of spectators. Outside, news crews began live coverage, amplifying the drama for millions watching in real time. Inside, Jasmine stood poised, the calm eye in the center of a brewing storm, knowing that the secrets she was about to reveal would make this courtroom and the nation pause, collectively on the edge of revelation. Trump's legal team shifted uncomfortably as Jasmine began to unveil the first concrete pieces of evidence. The courtroom, still buzzing from the opening salvo, tightened into a tense silence. Jasmine's voice cut through like a scalpel, precise and unyielding. "We are here to examine not conjecture, but documented facts," she declared, laying out financial statements, public filings, and verified communications. Each document she presented seemed to amplify the room's tension, the weight of history pressing down on every attendee. The audience sensed that this was no ordinary legal proceeding. This was a confrontation with truth itself. A former financial advisor was called to the stand, his hands trembling slightly as he approached the witness box. Jasmine's questions were deliberate, surgical. "Can you explain why these transactions were never disclosed publicly?" she asked, holding up a folder of meticulously organized evidence. The advisor shifted in his seat, eyes darting nervously between the judge and the documents. I followed directives from above, he stammered, voice betraying a mixture of fear and resignation. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, her gaze unwavering. So you acknowledge that there was awareness, yet no transparency. The words hung, heavy in the air. Gasps rippled softly through the gallery, and the legal press scribbled furiously. Meanwhile, Trump's counsel attempted to interject, their objections sharp and immediate. But Jasmine anticipated each motion with a calm confidence that only heightened the dramatic tension. Objection noted, Your Honor, the judge replied, but allowed the line of questioning to proceed. Jasmine turned back to the witness, voice steady but loaded with moral authority. This is not about politics. This is about accountability. Decisions made in secrecy, for personal or political gain, impact millions of Americans. And today, we bring that to light. The courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, as though the very walls were straining to hear each word dot as she continued. Jasmine framed the evidence within a broader narrative, juxtaposing Trump's public statements with the emerging documentation. Patterns became clear: contradictions, omissions, and carefully constructed facades that now crumbled under scrutiny. Each revelation was a ripple, sending waves of disbelief and tension through both the courtroom and the national media ecosystem. Outside, cameras flashed, pundits whispered, and social media began to hum with anticipation, amplifying the stakes even further by the chapter's end. The conflict was no longer abstract. It was tangible, visceral. Trump's legal team was on edge, the witnesses visibly unsettled, and the spectators gripped by the unfolding moral reckoning. Jasmine had transformed the courtroom into a theater of accountability, where every question, every response, and every pause served to illuminate the truth that had long remained hidden. The first layer of exposure was complete, but the storm was only beginning. The deeper revelations, the ideological clashes, and the climactic confrontations awaited, and the nation would be watching every heart-stopping moment. The witnesses now took center stage, each carrying fragments of a truth long obscured. Each testimony a thread in the web Jasmine was systematically unraveling. Former aides, financial officers, and insiders filed into the courtroom one by one, their expressions a mix of apprehension and resignation. Jasmine approached each with a careful precision, her questions like chisels, sculpting clarity from layers of hesitation and evasion. Can you recount the exact directives you received regarding these transactions? She asked one, her tone firm yet composed. The witness swallowed, fingers tightening around the microphone. I followed what I was told, he admitted, voice quivering, eyes flicking toward the judge for reassurance. The courtroom held its collective breath. Jasmine's gaze, sharp and unwavering, pinned him in place. And were you ever instructed to disclose these actions publicly? She pressed, the subtle intensity in her voice making the room almost vibrate. No, he whispered, the word almost lost in the hum of the spectators' quiet astonishment. Gasps rippled through the gallery, cameras clicking frantically, capturing the human tension and moral weight of every answer. Outside, news crews began their live coverage, broadcasting the suspense and incredulity to millions. Trump's legal team attempted to intervene, objections rising like thunder, but Jasmine countered smoothly, turning each interruption into an opportunity to reinforce the narrative. She highlighted discrepancies between prior public statements and the witnesses' admissions, connecting dots with a precision that was both legal and moral. You see, she said softly, directing her gaze to the judge in the courtroom. These are not isolated lapses. They form a pattern, a consistent series of decisions made in secrecy, with consequences that reach far beyond these walls. The weight of her words settled like a dense fog, pressing down on everyone present. Each witness added a new layer of tension. One former aide hesitated, then revealed meetings and conversations that contradicted prior public claims. Another described memos and internal communications that exposed deliberate obfuscation. The interplay of truth and denial created an almost cinematic rhythm, a dance between revelation and resistance. The spectators, reporters, and even the judge felt the electricity in the room, the palpable sense that history was being written in real time, that this was more than a legal proceeding. It was a confrontation with power and accountability. By the chapter's close, the courtroom was a tightly wound coil of suspense. Jasmine had woven a compelling narrative through testimony, exposing patterns, inconsistencies, and the human cost of secrecy. The witnesses, though nervous, had illuminated cracks in the carefully constructed facade. And as she stepped back, letting the tension simmer, every eye in the room, lawyers, journalists, spectators, understood that this was just the beginning. The stage was set for ideological clashes, moral reckonings, and revelations that would escalate toward the climactic confrontation, leaving no one untouched by the unfolding storm. The courtroom air grew heavier, charged not only with legal tension, but with ideological electricity. Jasmine Crockett shifted the focus, moving from the testimonies of witnesses to the broader consequences of the actions being revealed. This isn't just about documents or transactions, she stated, her voice steady but layered with moral urgency. It's about how power is wielded, how accountability is avoided, and how decisions made behind closed doors affect millions who have no voice in those corridors of influence. The words hung in the air, sharp and piercing, as the spectators absorbed the weight of the indictment, not merely against actions, but against the principle of transparency itself. Trump's counsel bristled, rising to frame the evidence as politically motivated, an attempt to manipulate public perception. "Objection, Your Honor," one said, voice tight, defensive. But Jasmine anticipated the move, turning it into a rhetorical pivot. "This is not a matter of partisanship," she countered smoothly. "It is a matter of facts, verified and undeniable, brought forward in the pursuit of truth. Accountability is not political. It is universal." She paced slightly, gestures controlled but commanding, letting the courtroom feel the gravity of her argument. Every word was measured, every pause deliberate, emphasizing the moral stakes behind the legal ones. The ideological clash intensified as the witnesses' revelations were contextualized. The documents showed not only deliberate concealment, but also the broader impact on markets, public trust, and democratic institutions. Jasmine laid out patterns of decision-making, contrasting public statements with the hidden reality, highlighting contradictions that demanded reckoning. The courtroom seemed to pulse with tension. The defense attempted to minimize and deflect, but Jasmine's narrative tied each piece of evidence into a cohesive moral argument. When those entrusted with power choose secrecy over transparency, she said, voice rising subtly, they do not merely bend rules, they endanger the very principles we rely on to govern fairly and justly. Spectators and journalists alike leaned forward, absorbing the interplay of facts and ideology. Social media cameras outside captured every moment, amplifying the intensity of the courtroom for the wider public. The ideological stakes became clear. This was more than a legal battle. It was a confrontation of values, a test of whether influence could override accountability, whether the powerful could hide behind rhetoric while facts quietly accumulated against them. By the end of the chapter, the courtroom was electric. Every gesture, every pause, every word carried weight. The defense's objections seemed increasingly reactive, almost defensive in the face of a narrative so precisely constructed. Jasmine's methodical unspooling of the ideological implications left the room aware that this trial was about more than legal technicalities. It was about moral clarity, public responsibility, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The stage was set for the next escalation, where the stakes would grow not only legally, but emotionally and publicly. As the drama reached outward beyond the walls of the courtroom itself, outside the courtroom, the tension that had been building inside began to radiate into the streets. News vans lined the perimeter, cameras swiveling to capture every reaction from the gallery. Protesters held signs, some shouting in support of Jasmine's revelations, others defending the former president with chants and placards. Social media. Feeds were alive, hashtags trending before the day had fully begun, each post amplifying the drama unfolding in real time. Inside, the atmosphere mirrored the chaos beyond the doors. Yet it was controlled, carefully orchestrated by Jasmine's measured presence and strategic pacing. As the public's attention intensified, Jasmine moved with calculated precision. She introduced additional pieces of evidence, weaving them into the narrative already established by her earlier questioning. The courtroom responded viscerally. Spectators leaned forward, journalists scribbled furiously, and even the judges. Neutral expression tightened with the weight of unfolding events. Each revelation caused subtle shifts in posture, gestures, and glances, a choreography of disbelief and realization. Transparency is not merely a principle, Jasmine said quietly, letting the words sink. It is a safeguard against the concentration of power, a protection for the public who cannot see what happens behind closed doors. Her voice, calm yet electric, carried across the courtroom like a bell tolling. Trump's legal team worked feverishly to counteract the growing tide. Objections rose sharply, motions filed, and whispered consultations between attorneys were brief, intense, and urgent. Jasmine anticipated these maneuvers, addressing each with a fluidity that emphasized not only her command of the law, but her mastery over the court's emotional narrative. Every attempt to deflect only underscores the necessity of accountability. She said, her gaze moving from witness to counsel, from gallery to judge. The courtroom seemed suspended in a taut moment, the interplay of argument and counterargument creating a near-physical tension that vibrated in every seat, every camera. As witnesses returned to the stand, the public dimension of the trial became even more pronounced. One aide recounted conversations that revealed deliberate efforts to obscure the truth from journalists, shareholders, and even government officials. Jasmine asked pointed questions, her voice steady but edged with moral weight. "Do you recognize the impact these decisions had on public trust?" she asked. The witness hesitated, swallowed, then nodded. Cameras caught every nuance, the flicker of a glance, the tightening of lips, the subtle shaking of hands, human reactions that made the abstract consequences of secrecy feel immediate and urgent. By the end of the chapter, the courtroom had become a microcosm of national discourse. The tension inside mirrored the fervor outside, the stakes both legal and symbolic. Jasmine had transformed the trial into a public reckoning, where every word and gesture resonated far beyond the marble walls. Spectators, journalists, and viewers at home understood the magnitude. This was more than a legal proceeding. It was a moral confrontation, amplified by the power of public scrutiny. The storm was intensifying, and the next chapters promised to escalate both the legal intricacy and the emotional resonance, driving toward revelations that could not be ignored. Trump's legal team had begun to shift from defensive postures to aggressive maneuvers, launching procedural objections, filing motions, and attempting to redirect the narrative. The courtroom hummed with a subtle but palpable tension, every whispered consultation and hurried shuffle of papers amplifying the stakes. Jasmine Crockett remained unshaken, her presence a calm yet commanding force that seemed to focus the room's energy into her precise, deliberate movements. Every objection from the defense became an opportunity for her to reinforce the moral and legal core of her argument. "Your attempts to distract will not obscure the facts," she said firmly. letting her words hang like a challenge in the air. "We are here to confront reality, not rhetoric." The judge, maintaining procedural neutrality, allowed the proceedings to continue, but even the gavel's sharp knock could not break the tension that now gripped the courtroom. Jasmine's questioning was meticulous, designed not merely to present facts, but to reveal the pattern of concealment and manipulation that had long remained hidden. "Let's clarify," she said, holding up internal memos and public filings side by side. "The documents submitted publicly tell one story. The internal communications tell another. How do you reconcile this?" A witness shifted uneasily, recognizing the impossibility of providing an answer that would not expose further inconsistencies. The interplay between the defense and Jasmine's team became almost choreographed. Each objection, each attempted delay, heightened the audience's awareness of the stakes. The spectators leaned forward, journalists scribbled feverishly, and cameras captured every pause, every subtle gesture, each contributing to a narrative of accountability versus obfuscation. Jasmine's voice, calm but unwavering, guided the courtroom like a conductor, transforming procedural complexity into a moral argument that was both comprehensible and emotionally resonant. Every motion to suppress, every attempt to deflect, only underscores the importance of transparency, she explained, her gaze sweeping the room. Truth does not bend under pressure. As the chapter progressed, witnesses were re-examined under Jasmine's focused scrutiny. The emotional weight of each testimony became more apparent. The hesitation, the nervous glances, the involuntary tightening of hands, or quick intake of breath. These human reactions, captured by reporters and cameras, made the abstract consequences tangible. Outside, social media and news feeds amplified the courtroom drama, broadcasting each twist to a nation riveted by the unfolding revelations. By the end of Chapter 6, the courtroom was a high-stakes arena of strategy and revelation. Jasmine had turned every procedural hurdle into a moment to illuminate truth, emphasizing not only the legality, but the ethical gravity of the case. The defense's attempts to regain control only reinforced the narrative of accountability, making the courtroom a stage where every motion, every objection, and every pause contributed to the emotional crescendo building toward the first major, explosive reveal in the next chapter. The tension was taut, the stakes national, and the audience fully engaged, anticipating the confrontation that would leave no stone unturned. The air in the courtroom became almost electric as Jasmine Crockett prepared to deliver the first major revelation. Spectators, reporters, and even members of Trump's legal team sat forward, sensing that the moment everyone had been bracing. FOR had arrived. Jasmine's gaze swept the room, calm but piercing, as she held up a set of meticulously compiled documents. "These," she began, her voice steady yet resonant with authority, "contradict every public statement made over the past several years." The room seemed to exhale collectively, a mixture of disbelief, tension, and anticipation hanging like fog over the marble floors. The first witness, a former aide who had previously hesitated under questioning, was recalled. Jasmine guided him through the evidence with surgical precision. "You've testified that these decisions were made behind closed doors," she said, holding a folder with internal memos. "Do you see how they conflict with public assurances?" The aide's hands shook slightly as he leaned forward, words failing him for a moment. I suppose?" he began, his voice faltering under the weight of undeniable documentation. Cameras clicked incessantly, capturing every flicker of fear, hesitation, and reluctant admission. Trump's legal team rose immediately, objections sharp and insistent. "Objection, Your Honor, speculative and inflammatory." But the judge, maintaining a careful neutrality, allowed Jasmine to continue, recognizing the legal grounding of her evidence. Jasmine turned back to the courtroom, her tone unwavering. "Speculation has no role here. Facts, documented and verified, are what we present, and the facts do not lie. She laid out the chain of correspondence, highlighting emails, financial transactions, and memos that revealed deliberate omissions, contradicting prior public statements and promises. The room seemed to contract with tension as the scale of the revelations became apparent. Spectators whispered among themselves. Journalists scribbled furiously, and cameras outside captured the scene for a national audience, broadcasting the drama in real time. The human reactions, the tightening of jaws, the flicker of surprise, the subtle flinch of Trump's counsel were cinematic in their intensity. Jasmine's voice, calm yet forceful, carried the weight of moral authority. "This is not about partisanship," she stated quietly, letting the words resonate. "It is about accountability. It is about exposing a pattern of concealment and a disregard for the public trust." By the chapter's close, the courtroom had transformed from a procedural arena into a theater of reckoning. The first major revelation had shattered the carefully constructed narrative, leaving both defense and spectators grappling with its implications. The tension was now almost unbearable. Whispers gave way to stunned silence. The judge leaned forward with solemn attention, and cameras captured the collective realization of a secret finally laid bare. Jasmine stepped back slightly, letting the weight of her disclosure settle. The storm had begun, and the courtroom and the nation would never be the same. The atmosphere in the courtroom had reached a fever pitch. Every eye was fixed on Jasmine Crockett as she stood poised, documents in hand, ready to confront the most powerful figure in the room. The energy was palpable. Spectators leaned forward in collective anticipation. Reporters scribbled feverishly, and cameras outside captured every nuance for a nation watching in real time. The tension was no longer just legal. It was moral, emotional, and deeply personal. Trump, seated with a carefully controlled expression, watched her approach. The defense team whispered among themselves, casting urgent glances, but Jasmine's focus remained unwavering. She began deliberately, her tone measured but charged with moral gravity. "We have reviewed the facts," she said, letting the words hang. "We have examined communications, transactions, and sworn testimony that cannot be reconciled with prior statements. The truth, which you have long concealed, is now before the court." Trump's eyes flicked briefly to the documents she held. "This is political theater," he interrupted sharply, voice tight, attempting to regain control. But Jasmine did not flinch. She met his gaze directly, unyielding. "You may attempt to dismiss facts as theater," she replied evenly, "but facts do not bend to rhetoric. The evidence speaks for itself, and today it speaks loudly." The courtroom felt almost suspended, a taut wire straining under the weight of confrontation. Spectators held their breath, the silence amplifying every word. She moved with calculated calm, pointing to discrepancies between his public assurances and the documented reality. "Your public statements promised transparency. Yet these internal communications reveal deliberate concealment," she continued, her voice sharp but controlled. "You were entrusted with power, responsibility, and the trust of millions, and decisions made in secrecy cannot be justified by spin or deflection." Every pause punctuated the moral gravity of the accusation. The courtroom seemed to pulse with the tension of unspoken recognition. This confrontation was a reckoning, and no defense could erase the weight of evidence. Trump's team attempted to interrupt, objections rising like waves. But the judge allowed Jasmine to proceed, recognizing the clear foundation of her case. Witnesses nodded subtly in affirmation. Journalists scribbled furiously, and cameras outside captured the drama for the public. Jasmine's voice grew quietly intense, her words precise and measured, yet loaded with undeniable moral force. Leadership demands accountability. Power without transparency is corruption. Today, the truth is no longer optional. It is visible to all. By the chapter's conclusion, the courtroom had become a stage of moral confrontation. Every motion, every objection, every flinch and pause contributed to the drama as Jasmine held the room in the grip of undeniable truth. The climax was not merely procedural, it was emotionally, intellectually, and morally explosive. Spectators, media, and the nation would feel the impact. The revelation of secrets now fully illuminated, setting the stage for poetic justice and resolution in the following chapters. The courtroom had settled into a tense, reverent silence. The storm of revelation had passed its peak, leaving behind a space thick with reflection and the weight of accountability. Jasmine Crockett, standing with quiet authority, allowed the impact of her confrontation to resonate. Every eye in the room, lawyers, spectators, journalists, even the judge recognized that what had occurred was more than a procedural victory. It was a moral reckoning, a confrontation with truth that no rhetoric or maneuver could erase. Trump's legal team sat rigid, grappling with the undeniable force of the evidence laid bare. Each piece of documentation, each witness testimony, had coalesced into a narrative that could not be dismissed. The silence was punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers and the occasional sharp inhale of a spectator, realizing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Jasmine's calm presence contrasted with the tension surrounding her, embodying a moral clarity that left the room in awe. "This is not about politics," she said softly, her voice carrying an unshakable authority. "It is about integrity, accountability, and the responsibility we all share to ensure truth prevails over secrecy." Witnesses who had previously appeared nervous now seemed resolved, their earlier fear replaced by the sense that they had contributed to a historic moment. Former aides and advisors exchanged subtle nods, their testimonies having illuminated patterns of concealment that could no longer be ignored. Jasmine's careful navigation of the legal and moral landscape had ensured that every revelation landed with maximum clarity and impact. The courtroom, once a space of tension and uncertainty, now felt like an arena of earned justice outside the courtroom. The public reaction mirrored the intensity of what had unfolded inside. News crews broadcast the proceedings in real time, capturing faces of astonishment, admiration, and reflection. Social media buzzed, hashtags surged, and opinion pieces began to contextualize the revelations as a watershed moment for transparency and accountability. Jasmine's strategy, grounded in facts, reinforced by testimony, and delivered with precision, had transformed what could have been a routine hearing into a national reckoning. By the end of the chapter, poetic justice had taken shape. The courtroom's reactions, combined with the undeniable documentation and clear moral framing, signaled that the effort to conceal the truth had ultimately failed. Jasmine's calm authority, her unwavering focus on facts and ethics, had ensured that the consequences of secrecy were fully illuminated. The stage was now set for final reflection, resolution, and the broader societal implications of the trial proof that accountability, when pursued with precision and integrity, can prevail, even against the most formidable opposition. The courtroom had emptied slowly, leaving behind echoes of a battle fought not with violence, but with truth and unyielding resolve. Jasmine Crockett remained for a moment, surveying the space she had transformed into a theater of accountability. The weight of what had transpired, revelations, confessions, contradictions exposed, and moral clarity asserted, settled over the room like a dense, undeniable presence. This was more than a legal victory. It was a statement, a demonstration, that transparency and courage could pierce even the thickest veils of secrecy. Outside, the city felt the tremor. News networks replayed key moments, highlighting Jasmine's calm authority and the explosive evidence she had unveiled. Social media feeds erupted with commentary, clips of her questions and witnesses' reactions going viral within minutes. Citizens debated, analysts dissected, and journalists sought clarity from every corner. reinforcing the profound societal impact of the courtroom revelations. Jasmine's work had extended beyond the walls of the building. She had shaped the public conversation, making accountability visible, immediate, and inescapable. Inside, the final reflections of the courtroom were as telling as the testimony itself. Trump's legal team gathered their papers, faces a mixture of exhaustion and incredulity. Witnesses who had initially appeared fearful now seemed resolute, their participation a key contribution to a process that had achieved both legal and moral resonance. The judge, a silent observer through the tension and drama, offered a brief acknowledgement, a recognition of the extraordinary clarity brought forth in proceedings that transcended ordinary protocol. Every gesture, every glance, every small movement seemed to carry the weight of collective realization. The truth had prevailed. Jasmine finally spoke one last time, voice calm, firm, and measured. Today, we have confronted decisions made in secrecy. We have illuminated patterns of concealment and reminded the public that accountability is not optional. It is essential. Leadership is defined not by what is hidden, but by how transparently one acts and by the courage to face scrutiny. Her words resonated not only within the courtroom, but across a nation watching, creating a sense of closure while leaving an indelible impression of moral authority and unflinching commitment to truth. As the courtroom cleared, spectators lingered, discussing the significance of what they had witnessed. Reporters and cameras captured the reactions, turning individual astonishment into collective awareness. Jasmine's performance, methodical, morally anchored, and emotionally resonant, had transformed a legal proceeding into a national moment of reckoning. The trial's aftermath would reverberate for weeks, months, and perhaps years, a testament to the power of facts, accountability, and courageous advocacy. In the end, the courtroom was more than a space of law. It had become a stage for justice, clarity, and moral reckoning. Jasmine Crockett had not only exposed a secret, she had reminded the public and the powerful alike that truth, once illuminated, cannot be ignored. The nation would remember this day. The courtroom would echo in history, and the precedent set would underscore that even the most formidable figures are accountable when faced with courage, evidence, and unwavering integrity. Weeks had passed since the courtroom had borne witness to the explosive revelations, yet the echo of that day continued to resonate across the nation. News outlets replayed the pivotal moments in endless loops. Jasmine's calm authority, the witnesses' reluctant admissions, and the irrefutable documentation that had shattered carefully constructed narratives. Social media had become a whirlwind of debate, commentary, and reflection. Clips of Jasmine's precise, measured questions went viral, inspiring discussions about transparency, accountability, and the moral responsibility of leadership. The courtroom drama had transcended its walls, embedding itself into the collective consciousness of the public. Politicians, pundits, and analysts weighed in from all sides. Some decried the revelations as partisan theater, while others recognized the undeniable force of evidence and moral clarity Jasmine had presented. Editorials framed the trial as a defining moment in modern American accountability, emphasizing the broader implications for governance, corporate oversight, and public trust. The courtroom's drama had sparked a national conversation about power, secrecy, and the ethical responsibilities that accompany leadership. Meanwhile, inside the legal community, Jasmine's methods were dissected and admired. Lawyers noted her meticulous preparation, her ability to weave testimony and documents into a cohesive moral argument, and her calm, unflinching presence under pressure. Judges and scholars alike referenced the trial as an example of how legal proceedings could achieve both procedural rigor and profound social impact. Jasmine's approach had set a precedent, demonstrating that courage, preparation, and a commitment to truth could transform a courtroom into a stage for national reflection. For Jasmine herself, the victory was not one of ego. but of responsibility fulfilled. She reflected privately on the immense weight she had carried, the secrets she had exposed, the lives affected by the concealment of truth, and the fragile balance between law, morality, and public perception. "This is why transparency matters," she whispered to herself, eyes scanning the skyline beyond the courthouse. "Because without it, trust erodes and accountability becomes optional." She knew the revelations would have lasting consequences, but she also understood that her role was to illuminate the truth. Leaving judgment to the public and history. By the chapter's close, the nation had absorbed the impact, and the courtroom itself had become symbolic a space where power could be challenged, where truth could emerge unscathed, and where moral clarity could prevail against secrecy. Jasmine Crockett had not merely won a legal argument. She had demonstrated the enduring power of accountability, courage, and unwavering integrity. And while the storm of debate would continue to swirl, one truth remained undeniable. History had witnessed a reckoning, and the courtroom had become a crucible where justice and morality had met, and the nation had never looked away. Months had passed since the courtroom revelations, yet the echoes of Jasmine Crockett's confrontation with power continued to resonate nationwide. Public discourse had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, as citizens, journalists, and political figures grappled with the implications of transparency exposed under the unforgiving glare of scrutiny. Jasmine's methodical unraveling of secrecy had become a case study not only in law but in moral courage, demonstrating that even the most formidable figures are accountable when confronted with truth. Political analysts debated the broader ramifications. Policies were reconsidered, oversight measures scrutinized, and conversations about ethical governance intensified. A trial had sparked a ripple effect far beyond its legal boundaries, inspiring calls for accountability in public offices, corporations, and institutions nationwide. Jasmine's meticulous presentation evidence, testimony, and unflinching narrative had not only illuminated hidden actions, but had redefined the standards for public trust. Citizens were no longer passive observers. They now demanded clarity, responsibility, and integrity from those in positions of power. For Jasmine herself, the victory was quiet but profound. Her reflection was not on a claim, but on the deeper moral responsibility she had fulfilled. Walking the halls of justice in the weeks following the trial, she considered the weight of secrecy, the human cost of concealment, and the fragile trust that binds society together. Truth is the cornerstone of accountability, she thought, the words echoing like a mantra. It is not enough to expose wrongdoing. We must ensure that the systems meant to prevent it remain vigilant, transparent, and just. Public perception, too, had transformed. Jasmine's calm authority and unwavering commitment to facts had inspired admiration across political lines. Her approach, grounded in ethical rigor and emotional intelligence, became a blueprint for advocacy, a reminder that courage and preparation can turn a courtroom into a catalyst for societal reflection. The media continued to highlight the trial's most pivotal moments, not for scandal alone, but for the moral clarity that had emerged from the drama. As the chapter drew to a close, the narrative settled into a sense of enduring resolution. The courtroom, once a space of tension, spectacle, and confrontation, had become a symbol of possibility, that even in the corridors of power, truth can prevail, accountability can be enforced, and justice can be achieved. Jasmine Crockett had not merely challenged secrecy. She had illuminated the path forward, demonstrating that courage, integrity, and unwavering dedication to truth can resonate far beyond the walls of any courtroom. The nation, forever marked by the trial, now carried a lesson etched into its collective conscience. That accountability, when pursued with clarity and conviction, leaves an impact that time cannot erase. The courtroom drama had faded from the front pages, Yet its impact rippled far beyond the marble walls where it had unfolded. Citizens, journalists, and lawmakers continued to digest the revelations that Jasmine Crockett had so meticulously unveiled. The trial had become more than a legal proceeding. It had transformed into a moral and cultural touchstone, reshaping public expectations about transparency, accountability, and the responsibilities of those in power. Political commentators analyzed the long-term consequences. Discussions of policy reform, oversight, and ethical governance dominated editorial pages. Legislators referenced the trial as an example of the importance of scrutiny and procedural integrity. Public institutions faced renewed pressure to ensure their processes could withstand public and legal scrutiny, and corporations began revisiting internal controls in the shadow of what had been revealed. Jasmine's courtroom strategy, combining meticulous evidence, moral framing, and emotionally resonant delivery, became a model not just for lawyers, but for anyone seeking to hold power accountable. For Jasmine herself, the aftermath was reflective, but resolute. She understood that her role had extended beyond the immediate courtroom victory. Truth, she thought, is not only a weapon against wrongdoing, it is the foundation of a just society. She considered the broader consequences. Individuals and institutions that had operated in secrecy now faced a future where concealment carried real risk, and the public, emboldened by her work, demanded more from those entrusted with power. Media continued to amplify key moments from the trial, ensuring that the lessons learned reached a wide audience. Clips of Jasmine's calm yet forceful questioning circulated alongside analyses of witness testimony and evidence. Social media discourse remained alive, debating ethics, leadership, and the moral responsibilities highlighted by the case. Across the nation, the courtroom became a symbol, proof that transparency could prevail, that courage in the face of secrecy mattered, and that even the most powerful could be held accountable. By the chapter's end, a sense of enduring resolution had settled over the narrative. The courtroom had served its purpose as both stage and crucible, and Jasmine Crockett had emerged as a figure whose diligence and integrity had reshaped public understanding of accountability. The trial's lessons would persist, guiding future discourse and decision-making, and reminding the nation that truth, courage, and moral clarity can resonate far beyond the immediate legal battle. In the hearts and minds of the public, the echoes of this confrontation would endure, a testament to what can be achieved when preparation, integrity, and resolve meet the unyielding pursuit of justice. Months after the courtroom had emptied, the impact of Jasmine Crockett's revelations continued to reverberate across the nation. The trial, once a tense and contained legal battle, had become a symbol of accountability and moral clarity. Citizens, journalists, and political figures referenced the case not just for its legal outcomes, but for the lessons it offered about integrity, transparency, and courage in the face of power. Jasmine's measured yet forceful approach had transformed a courtroom into a stage where truth and justice could be witnessed by the public in real time. In the halls of power, the echoes were tangible. Politicians reviewed internal processes, corporate leaders reassessed ethical guidelines, and public officials took note that concealment could no longer be assumed safe. The trial had established a standard, a reminder that those entrusted with influence carry a responsibility to act openly and ethically. Jasmine's courtroom strategy, combining meticulous evidence, moral framing, and emotionally resonant narrative, became a case study illustrating how legal skill can intersect with moral authority to achieve societal impact. For Jasmine herself, the sense of accomplishment was quiet but profound. She reflected on the months since the trial, recognizing that her work had done more than expose wrongdoing. It had reshaped expectations for leadership. Transparency is not optional, she thought, and accountability is the foundation upon which trust is built. She understood that the courtroom had been a catalyst, igniting discussions about ethics, governance, and public responsibility that would endure long after the trial concluded. The public, too, had internalized the lessons. Social media feeds remained filled with discussion, analysis, and reflection. News outlets revisited the trial's pivotal moments, emphasizing the clarity, courage, and moral precision Jasmine had demonstrated. Citizens debated, shared, and reflected, engaged in a national dialogue about power, ethics, and responsibility. The courtroom had become more than a legal arena. It had become a cultural touchstone, a benchmark for integrity that would inspire future generations. By the end of the chapter, the legacy was clear. Jasmine Crockett had not only exposed secrets and enforced accountability, she had demonstrated the enduring power of courage, preparation, and moral clarity. The courtroom drama had achieved more than a verdict. It had transformed public consciousness, reminding the nation that truth, once illuminated, cannot be ignored. As the final echoes of testimony faded into history, one certainty remained: the lessons of this trial and the example set by Jasmine Crockett would continue to resonate, shaping the nation's understanding of justice, leadership, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. The courtroom lights had long dimmed, but the resonance of Jasmine Crockett's actions continued to ripple outward, far beyond the marble halls and television cameras. Across the nation, citizens reflected on the implications of the trial, what it revealed about leadership, accountability, and the fragile trust between power and the public. Jasmine herself walked quietly through the corridors of justice. The echoes of her own words and the testimony she had guided still vivid in her mind. Every step carried the weight of responsibility, tempered by the satisfaction of truth, finally illuminated. In private moments, she reflected on the months of preparation, the painstaking gathering of evidence, and the moral courage required to confront one of the most formidable figures in recent history. Courage is not the absence of fear, she thought, but the determination to act despite it. The courtroom had been her stage, but the true performance had been one of restraint, precision, and unwavering adherence to principle. It was this combination of strategy and moral clarity that had ensured the revelations landed with the gravity they deserved, transforming the trial into a national moment of reckoning. The societal impact was already visible. Public discourse had shifted, emphasizing transparency, ethical governance, and civic responsibility. Media outlets revisited the trial, analyzing each question, each piece of evidence, and each reaction with renewed depth. Citizens debated and reflected, their conversations shaped by the clarity Jasmine had brought to a complex web of secrecy. Institutions reconsidered internal practices, aware that the public now demanded vigilance, honesty, and accountability. At every level of leadership, Jasmine's personal journey mirrored the broader societal awakening. She had navigated fear, opposition, and immense pressure, emerging not only victorious, but morally fortified. The courtroom had been more than a legal battleground. It had been a crucible of character and principle. Her example demonstrated that preparation, ethical grounding, and emotional intelligence could shape outcomes far beyond the immediate sphere of influence, inspiring both peers and the public to recognize the power of integrity in the pursuit of justice. As the final chapter drew to a close, the nation held a collective understanding. The trial was over, but the lessons endured. Jasmine Crockett had not only exposed hidden truths, she had redefined what accountability could look like in a modern democracy. The courtroom had been the stage, the evidence the script, and Jasmine herself the agent of change. In the end, history would remember not only the revelations, but the courage, clarity, and unwavering dedication that made them possible. And in that resonance, the story found its closure, an enduring testament to truth, moral fortitude, and the transformative power of one person willing to confront secrecy and demand accountability.